So they have been called out along with chiefs, battalion chiefs, obviously all of law enforcement within a 50-mile radius. We're 2 minutes before the hour of 6 p.m. We've heard Joe Fryer and we've heard the local police chief going through what we know. It appears that at this hour, and facts change in these situations, we have one fatality, and that would be the suspect. A female in this case. The police chief was speculating that it was her, that what took her down was a self-inflicted gunshot wound. We're going to have to do a lot more fact-finding to be able to confirm something like that. A number of people are asking what type of weapon was used in this case. The police chief had no answer for us. We don't know if it was long gun, handgun. We just do not know. We can, try to make some assumptions. We can try to speculate based on what we have heard witnesses say about the report of the rounds going off, but we just don't know. Again, San Bruno, California, for those unfamiliar with the West Coast. Nicole, give me 30 seconds on San Bruno, California, as I'm coming up on the top of the hour.
I believe it's about, probably less than half a dozen miles from the heart of San Francisco. It is the heart of Silicon Valley. Used to be that people would commute to San Francisco for jobs. Now it's people in San Francisco that commute to Silicon Valley for incredible jobs at places like YouTube.
And pay incredible prices to live
to live there and then drive in long commutes. So this is right near the airport. This really is sort of the heart of the San Francisco Bay Area.
This is near SFO, that's right.
The airport, I believe, has a physical address either in or right adjacent to San Bruno. But it is certainly, as you said earlier in our coverage, the beating heart of Silicon Valley. These jobs are coveted. People are recruited from all over the world to work at a campus that Kara Swisher described earlier in our coverage as airy, as highly desirable. And the fact that, I know we say this every time, but if it could happen there, it really could happen anywhere.
The 6 o'clock hour has arrived here on the East Coast for folks tuning in to see my colleague Ari Melber. We sadly remain in breaking news coverage because of the story that has compelled our attention. That is a workplace shooting at the YouTube headquarters in San Bruno, California, just south of San Francisco. Among those covering it for us, our own Tom Winter, who's been kind of our fact gatherer, listening to, among other things, all the police frequencies on the scene. Tom, are we able to report that not the all clear being sounded, but something close to that it's no longer an active scene?
Yeah, I think that's a perfect description, Brian. So at this time, it appears that the scene is active only from a standpoint of going through the facility, double checking, as the police chief just said on this air moments ago, in making sure that there's nobody else that may have been injured that they're not yet aware of. But at this point, it appears that they believe that they know who the suspect is, that she is deceased, and that it is from a gunshot wound, self-inflicted gunshot wound. What we don't know is this woman's identity, and to a point you were making earlier, we don't yet know what type of weapon that this woman had. It is very rare, Brian, for a woman to be involved in an active shooting as the shooter. It is in a small percentage, single percentage digits, according to the FBI's latest data, as far as women that have been involved in modern day active shooting. So that goes back several decades. And so this is not something that we normally see. And the other thing is, about 45 minutes ago, you and I were speaking on the air, and I said there were no reported fatalities. I was obviously referring to innocent victims and not to the shooter. That appears to still be the case. We know that at least one person is in critical condition and several others are injured. That person in critical condition is a man. At this point, we're still trying to figure out, from talking with law enforcement sources, we've had some suggestions of what the motive is, but we haven't been able to kind of lock that in just yet. One thing that we are hearing at this point, there's nothing to suggest that this was some sort of a terrorist attack, that this person had a specific ideology, and that's why that they did the shooting today. But that's preliminary information, obviously subject to change. But that's one thing that we're hearing. Police do not believe at this point is a motive. But as far as the reason why that this woman did what she did today, that's still a little bit unclear, and is obviously going to take law enforcement some time to make sure they have all the right answers and they've talked to all the people that they need to.
Hey, Tom, before I let you go, we just mentioned we don't have an answer from the chief on the weapon used. Do you have anything?
No, Brian, we're not getting anything through our normal law enforcement circles, through the folks that we normally talk to. We can tell you that ATF is on scene. They've put that out there, and then, as you noted some time ago, the FBI is also on scene. So I would suspect that by the next briefing, we'll start to get some of those details and start to get an identity to this woman. Was she an employee there, and was this somebody that might have a criminal history? So those are some of the things that we're still waiting to hear about, and some of the things that we hope to update you with.
Just a note for our control room, we should take the wording moments ago and perhaps change it to earlier, because this was a lot of the scenes we're showing were very early on when people were entering with guns drawn. It is not an accurate depiction of the YouTube campus right now, where again we're just shy of that time when the all clear has been sounded. I was just reminded, because this is in the Bay Area, think of it. Senator Dianne Feinstein was her career, of course, marked by gun violence. She became mayor because of an assassination. Congresswoman Jackie Speer, whose district YouTube is in, shot, miraculously survived in Jonestown, Guyana, as gunmen opened fire on our NBC television crew as they were there on a congressional visit to check on a cult that had formed just prior to the Jonestown massacre. They were trying to leave, and everyone there ended up being killed. Jackie Speer miraculously shot multiple times on the tarmac at that airport, so she knows from gun violence. Pete Williams, I note, has been on the phone and is now off the phone. Pete, did you grab anything?
Well, just to enlarge on a point we just made a moment ago, Brian, which is this is more and more looking like the woman who came there came with a specific target in mind. Sounds like a domestic dispute that played out at the YouTube headquarters. That's the impression that we're getting right now from the initial investigating work that the law enforcement people have done. In other words, this woman came there because she had a specific target in mind, and that would square with the details we have from the hospital of the shooting victims, of one male who is in critical condition. He seems to be the most seriously wounded, so it would seem logical that she came there to attack a man at the YouTube headquarters. One woman was shot, and then another woman was seriously wounded. Whether these were other targets or simply people who were collateral damage to her attack, we don't know. But that's more and more what it's sounding like. This is not in the category of the kind of shootings that have become an all too common, where someone just goes in, fires a lot of shots to create the maximum amount of carnage, draw attention, make a statement, God knows what. This is a much more prosaic kind of thing that unfortunately goes on in this country all the time, of someone trying to settle a score with a firearm.
Let me take that information right over to Clint Van Zandt. Clint, based on your experience, your reaction to what Pete just said appear to be, preliminarily, the circumstances surrounding this shooting.
Yes, Brian, I know none of us want to get ahead of this, but when you start to put these numbers together, I agree 100% with Pete. That's what it's going to look like now. You and I had talked earlier, and I mentioned a study of mass shooters, of 96 mass shooters. Only 2 of those were women at the time. And, of course, we all can harken back to the December 2015 San Bernardino shootings, where 14 were killed, 21 wounded by that husband husband-wife team. But, you know, in a situation like this, Brian, whether it's our schools or our workplace, we think because we have an entry badge or a magnetic door lock, we're safe. And unfortunately, that doesn't prove to be the case. Just like the commissioner there, when I work with my clients on violence in the workplace, you know, we reduce it to 3 words, run, hide, fight. But you realize how much distance is covered in just those 3 words. And I'm sure all of these employees, when they heard those gunshots, and I heard one person suggest they had heard 8 gunshots, Brian. Well, to you, to me, to others, that's going to suggest likely a semi-automatic pistol. That would be consistent with a weapon that a woman could bring in some type of bag or purse or something else. But realize she had to get through those entry doors that may have stopped police from getting in because she was either allowed to come in, she walked in behind someone else, she had a badge. But in a recent year, Brian, we've had over 400 workplace homicides. That was a 15% increase from the year before. So we have a lot of people with emotional, psychological challenges that are looking for violence as a means of conflict resolution. And unfortunately, schools and or the workplace are places that they choose to act this out.
I'm looking at Bill Bratton here in our studio, whose career has spanned everything from Boston cop to New York City police commissioner, and I'm watching you take in all this information. What are you thinking?
Well, what's being described is the complexity of life in our society today with all the potential threats. It's what's being shown on the screen is the complexity of what's happening right now at the YouTube campus, all the moving parts. But there's moving parts at the hospital, there's moving parts at the home. Moving parts in a lot of homes that we have those other victims. Many families who maybe have not heard from their loved ones because they haven't had access to phones that may have been left behind in the office when they fled, worrying, is that my loved one at the hospital? So there's still so much, while the incident is over in the sense of the violence, the ripple effects we talked about earlier continue to spread and expand.
Think of all the people who are driving too fast right now, shaken up, heading to this area to pick up a loved one, heading to this area because, God forbid, the loved one had to leave their phone inside. They got a sketchy message, we're all okay. There's going to be a command post, there's going to be a community center. We know all this because this follows a perverse muscle memory in 2018.
Mm-hmm. And tomorrow they'll have the counselors coming in to assist and people that need that emotional assistance. Now, those ripple effects just keep expanding, and unfortunately in our society today they become all too commonplace, all too well known to all of us.
Kara Swisher, as we mentioned, executive editor of Recode and a veteran journalist covering all things Silicon Valley. Kara, I was saying earlier that, you know, YouTube was part of the story after Parkland when they decided to ban a category of videos dealing with gun how-to videos. How are they looked at as far as where all the progressive kind of Silicon Valley big employers stack up?
How are they looked at? I mean, they're like, you're part of Google, obviously, and Google's been a big part of Silicon Valley for many years. You know, they have a separate campus from Google. They're kept separate. They've been kept separate since they were bought many years ago. And so, you know, it's a very, I've been there. I was just there recently. I spoke in front of employees there. It seems like a great workforce. Obviously, they've been in the news a lot lately around the Russia issues, around Russians using YouTube to manipulate the election. And there's been a lot of stress on that. And around Logan Paul, some of their YouTube creators have been in controversy. So it's been a little tougher place to work from a content point of view. But in general, it's considered a great workplace.
And because you're in and out of employers like this and campuses like this, talk to us, especially those of us who are used to kind of East Coast traditional office building security. What is the security like? What do you first encounter? What do you continue to encounter as you go through a building like that?
Well, it depends on the campus. I mean, some campuses like Apple is very locked down. It's very hard to get through, and you have to go through multiple securities to get through, especially their new building. But in general, most campuses feel open. You can walk right into most of campus. They're like college campuses. It's like walking into, you know, I don't know, Princeton or Harvard or wherever. Just you can walk right in. And getting into the buildings is relatively easy. You can tailgate behind people. I've done it many times. The main visitors areas are rather large and lovely. There's always food or drinks and things like that. Very colorful most of the time, very comfortable. Place to be, very open, and that's the one thing. They're always experimenting with ways to work and workspaces. And in Google itself, they had a Quonset hut at one point because people liked Quonset huts, and they experiment all the time. And so the YouTube headquarters is very colorful. It's very open. It's actually on the street compared to most tech campuses. It's unlike other campuses. And they have some offices across the street, so it's in a streetscape, essentially. Not a suburban one, but it's a streetscape. And it's a lovely campus, but it's quite open. I was just there. I walked into the cafeteria without being stopped by anybody.
Tell us about the number of employees. How does this campus stack up against the truly big ones, the Googles, the Apples, the Facebooks?
Oh, it's very small. I don't know how many people are there, but it can't be more than a couple hundred people. I don't know. There could be more there. They could have them in other offices in the area. The San Bruno is its main campus. It has a facility in Los Angeles. It's quite large. But compared to the Google campus or the Facebook campus, it's quite small. And it's purposely kept that way. It's supposed to be a much smaller unit, even though it's an enormous video platform with such impact throughout the world. It's not a very big campus, and it's very casual. It's a super casual place to hang out. I mean, the CEO, Susan Wojcicki, and I were down in the cafeteria eating. There's not a lot of, that the more important executives are somewhere else. She has an office right among the other employees, as is often the case in internet companies. And so it's a very open plan, and I think it'll be interesting to see the impact. I'm writing a story on this because most of these campuses are designed to be open and accessible and fun to work at. Sometimes people make fun of them that they're juvenile. There's a slide, I think, at the YouTube campus that people slide down. Things like that. They'll have toys, bouncy balls, things like that, which is it's funny and quirky, but it's very common.
Well, they also work incredibly hard. They work incredibly long hours. They're more creative than most. They require kind of downtime that may look like downtime, but is actually collaborative discussion going on. I get it, and I can't wait to see what our management says when I put in for a slide.
Yeah, you're not going to get one, Brian.
No, okay. You're right. Yeah. Hey, Kara Swisher, it's always such a pleasure to be able to talk to you on television. Thank you for taking my numerous questions about this. We're looking at now this collection of, this is earlier to police officers running toward the YouTube campus. It has calmed way down. This happened at the kind of end of lunch hour today, San Bruno, California. Report of shots fired. All too common. We got the first indications from local police scanners that there had been a report of shots fired. Local law enforcement descended on this complex of buildings. You see here, it's right up against a kind of a wildland area. There's a driveway slash fire break in the back of the building where we've seen employees congregating. All of it's supposed to be environmentally friendly and green. You've probably noted the fact that the roof has grass growing on it and the three main buildings. But it's very much a kind of residential campus, and as we heard Kara say, there were great pains taken for employee comforts and to be part of the culture in Silicon Valley, and to note the fact that they have younger than average, more creative than average employees. I would also note, though, we're looking at a death toll of 1 so far, and that is believed to be the female assailant. We have people in hospitals that are badly wounded who we need to pray for and keep in our thoughts. Remember the ripple effects. All of the people you see, that's responding law enforcement. They all leave home and family to come respond. All the people you see here, these are YouTube employees whose only act today was to come to work. They have now heard the sound of gunfire, many of them. They have been patted down. Everyone is assumed to be a suspect until proven otherwise, even if you look for all the world like an innocent YouTube employee. This is a trauma that will be with them always. They can now say they were connected to a workplace shooting. And so that's what we need to remember. Beyond the dead and injured, that this spreads exponentially into a community. My friend and colleague Stephanie Ruhle is about to take over our live coverage from San Bruno, California. Stephanie.
Ryan, when I watch this, think about YouTube's campus. Think about the type of people who work there. It is the opposite of an oppressive environment. When you heard Kara Swisher describing the campus, you joked about this idea that there's a slide, and there's not a slide, but you know that the YouTube founders were so focused on their creators and having those young employees love working there. So to read these eyewitness accounts, so to hear from people who are having lunch on the patio when suddenly they hear noises, never thinking it could be gunshots.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened.
It is amazing, stunning, and upsetting. I want to bring in Sean Henry, former FBI Executive Assistant Director. Sean, as we're processing this news out of San Bruno, California, it's all too familiar, these mass shootings, but this one's quite different. We haven't seen one on a corporate campus. We haven't seen one with a female shooter. What's your take on all this?
Yeah, you mentioned two things that are unusual, where we see happening in a corporate environment, and to see a female involved where you've got multiple gunshot victims. That is highly unusual. I want to go back, Stephanie, to some of the things you were just covering there with Brian about the campus, the open campus. I've spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley in the last few years, and that is the environment that these companies want to portray. They want to be open. It wants to be park-like, really very, very free of restrictions. You see the employees as they're leaving, they're wearing shorts and T-shirts, certainly not the type of attire you'd see in Midtown Manhattan on a daily basis. So it is that environment that is free and liberating, but in an environment like that, you've got a lower level of security, I think, and certainly the employees' attitudes are such that they're not thinking this is going to happen. They're going about their day. They are in a creative area, creative space, and it's all about innovation. And that environment today turned out to be tragic for a few people.
Sean, let's listen to this together. Just moments ago, we got in the dispatch call from operators to local police after receiving the 911 call. Listen in.
Shots fired to the rear of 901 Cherry Avenue. We're receiving numerous 911. So far, nothing's seen, just heard only. We have one RP stating that people are running out of the business. Sounds like it's coming from YouTube.
Shooter. Another party says they spotted someone with a gun. Suspect came from the back patio. Again, we have a report of subject with a gun. They heard 7 to 8 shots being fired. This will be from the YouTube building.
And there we have it, the dispatch call. Commissioner Bill Bratton's still with us. You've heard calls like that so many times.
Unfortunately.
And does it surprise you?
In today's world, unfortunately, it does not. It's become very commonplace, much too commonplace, much too frequent. It sets the stage for what officers going toward. They get very minimal information. They're going to a large facility, not knowing quite what they're getting into. And it's one of the reasons why it takes so long to try and put this together, because the initial confusion, excitement, fear, the unknown, it takes a while to put it together. And fortunately, this event seems to have been of a scale that has come together very quickly. Now it's a matter of determining the exact circumstances. What was the motivation?
Sean, walk us through how they begin to put these puzzle pieces together. I'm just receiving word from a colleague that 2 sources say the suspect, the female gun person, was in her mid-30s. So we mentioned it earlier, when we hear of these type of shootings, it's very rare that it's a woman. So we don't know if she was an employee, if she had a target when she went into the building.
You know, when you see a shooting like this, the first thing I think about when it's on a campus or in the corporate environment is a disgruntled employee. That would be the default, but certainly there's an awful lot of investigation here. I think, Stephanie, now that you've got a suspect who's been identified, presumably the dead woman has been identified by the police, they are going to do a very, very thorough interview of everybody who may have known her. Certainly any co-workers, if in fact she was an employee there, going through her HR personnel file, neighbors, people that were friends with her. They will be executing a search warrant, I imagine, on her home or her vehicle, looking at digital media, social media, any of the contacts that she's got. So they'll do a thorough investigation at this point. Now that the initial situation is resolved and the crisis is over, they will do the investigation to try and determine what the motive is, what brought her to the campus this afternoon and caused the death of this individual, Stephanie.
Today's crisis is over, but those YouTube employees have to go back to work, if not tomorrow, in the coming days. What will be the steps for the company? What do they need to do? Earlier, we spoke to Kara Swisher of Recode, and she was sort of walking us through that campus, and not unlike many others, it's a relatively open campus, much like a college atmosphere, which is what a lot of people like these days.
Yeah, that's right. Those campuses are wide open. There are hundreds of thousands, if not more than 1 million square feet of space there, multiple buildings covering acres of land. I think what they'll look to do is crisis counseling for employees. There'll be people who will be traumatized by this. On the heels of what we saw in Florida just a month ago, and now this hitting so close to home, there are going to be people who will be traumatized, who are going to be overwhelmed. There'll be a lot of anxiety. So typically in this type of situation, they bring in crisis counselors. I also want to mention, Stephanie, that a lot of companies are doing active shooter training now for their employees. Much the way we do fire drills and the like, they do active shooter training as we've seen happen in high schools and universities around the country in the past few years. That certainly is not something they're going to do tomorrow, but going forward, I imagine there will be other companies in the Bay Area that will be taking on that type of training, looking to ensure that if there is an event such as this, they'll be able to avert it, Stephanie.
I do want to share, President Trump sent out a message via Twitter about 30 minutes ago, was just briefed on the shooting at YouTube's HQ in San Bruno, California. Our thoughts and prayers are with everybody involved. Thank you to our phenomenal law enforcement officers and first responders that are currently on the scene. I certainly echo that sentiment. When you look at the law enforcement officers, you know, in those videos, again, running toward the action, running toward the crisis. It's stunning. We are so fortunate to have those brave men and women. I want to bring in Frank Figliuzzi. He's a former assistant director for counterintelligence at the FBI. Frank, from everything that you've seen so far, what's your assessment?
Well, we rely on the data, and the data we have about active shooter workplace violence in general tells us that the root cause, number one root cause, is a domestic dispute that spills into the workplace. So I always kind of operate from that assumption first. And it may be what we're seeing here. Secondly, I have lots of questions about corporate culture at YouTube and many corporations in Silicon Valley, whether or not it was indeed conducive to providing employees, as Sean Henry has said, workplace violence, active shooter training. I work with many corporate clients, and there's a variety of cultures, Stephanie. Some that say this is too unpleasant to deal with in our workplace, and others saying, no, I want to rehearse, I want tabletop drills, I want employees to understand the warning signs and indicators, and I want to open up reporting so that people can tell us they're concerned about a coworker. So there'll be lots of study and introspection around this, and I'm sure throughout Silicon Valley tonight.
So is it a time when that should be the responsibility of corporate America? Should those corporations be having active shooter drills? Should they have hotlines open? You know, that's not an area of expertise you see in many corporations.
Oh, there's no question that the #1 priority for any corporate CEO should be the safety of his or her workplace. And today, the trend, the pattern, the expectation is that they are planning for an active shooter, that they are teaching their employees the warning signs and indicators, but equally important, after you train, you better have a reporting mechanism in place that allows employees to feel comfortable to bring those concerns forward, and then you need to act on them credibly. You know, Stephanie, inevitably, when we start interviewing people, coworkers, friends, we always hear the same mantra. I knew something was going to happen. I thought something would happen. She was a concern to ours. And people are learning that these suspects don't just snap. And that's what you teach employees, that there's a continuum of behavior that takes you from aspirational thoughts to actually acting out. And if you can intervene in that flashpoint before something happens, that's what you need to teach your employees to do.
Let's bring in Tom Winter from NBC's investigative news reporting team. Tom, what do you know?
Hey, Stephanie Rule, we're getting a little bit of new information from myself, my colleagues Andrew Blankstein and Jonathan Dienst. The reporting is that police at this point in their investigation, and it's early on in their investigation, say that a woman in her 30s who eventually died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound approached an outdoor patio and dining area around lunchtime today and began to fire. At this point, multiple senior law enforcement officials tell us here at NBC News that they believe that the motive behind the shooting is a domestic-related dispute or some sort of a domestic-related incident. The senior law enforcement officials say they do not believe that this is connected to terrorism in any way at this point in the investigation. So the normal assets that would normally be needed to conduct a terrorism investigation, those assets aren't being summoned at this time, and they believe that this is some sort of a targeted type shooting that's consistent with what Pete Williams was alluding to earlier, and obviously Frank Figluzzi was alluding to earlier. And so at this point, I think it's important whenever we have one of these type of shootings to say that we're not dealing with a terrorism incident, and to perhaps shine a little bit of light at this point of what the motive is. And again, I'm not sure if I mentioned before, but the woman appears to be in her mid-30s in age. We don't know yet whether or not this shooter was an employee of YouTube. So that's something that we're still trying to get ourselves and report on out. And we also at this point don't have a sense of what the weapon is. Obviously, the law enforcement on the ground is probably familiar with that at this point, but the folks that we're talking to haven't been able to glean any insight into that. So, Stephanie, that's what we have at this time.
And while we don't know if this woman was a YouTube employee, was she someone that's been identified? Is she a familiar face to anyone on the campus?
I'm not sure. As far as the investigators on the ground, presumably at this point, Stephanie, those are the exact type of interviews that they are conducting. But at this point, there hasn't been any information about her identity that has been put out in more broad law enforcement circles, and police have not said that on the record at this point. So it's not something that it's not information that we have that we're in a position to share at this point.
I just want to read that to our audience again, because it's important, as especially for those who have friends or family in the area. Multiple senior law enforcement officials are telling NBC News that the YouTube shooter is a woman in her 30s. She approached an outdoor patio and dining area around lunchtime today when she began to fire. And at this point, the law enforcement officials say they believe the motive behind this shooting is a domestic-related dispute. I want to bring Sean Henry back. Sean, just moments ago, Frank was saying the #1 priority for CEOs is to keep their employees safe. And the thing that we learn after so many of these shootings is that there were warning signs, but people simply don't know how to act on those signs. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think that Frank is right theoretically. I think that many CEOs, I mean, there's certainly a business function. From the corporate security side, and Frank is a consultant in this space, I do security work as well. We impress upon boards of directors and CEOs, senior executives, that they have to ensure that this is their top priority, that their people, the people who innovate for them, the people who generate their revenue, the people who are creative, they've got to be protected. And it's all about the people, the the intellectual property and the facilities, the people being the primary priority for everybody in that organization. There has to be more training, and it's just the world that we live in. I do believe that there are some organizations that are less attentive than others. Not commenting at all on this particular issue because I don't know what YouTube has in their training cadre, but this is something that has to be done on a regular basis because the world we live in today, there are terrorist incidents, there is access to guns, there are people who have violent streaks, and we've seen these types of shootings at schools, at fast food restaurants, at places of worship. This happens regularly, and people have to protect themselves. And from a corporate perspective, it really starts with the leadership of the organization, holding that in high regard, ensuring their employees are trained, ensuring that they've got the resources put in place to help provide that training, and to ensure that there are multiple layers of defense, including how to get into the building, card access, video cameras, etc. The types of things that people would expect to try and make the building safer. That is, especially in Silicon Valley, it's a tough act to balance because it is a very different kind of that campus mentality and that innovative mind, and it's not consistent with the security measures that need to be put in place, Stephanie.
That is true. People there do like an open, creative environment, but after a time or after an incident like this, safety must come first. You know, you said just a moment ago, this is the world we're living in. But as we look at the images on the screen right now, they were taken earlier today. None of those people thought they would be going to work today, having their lunch on the patio or in the cafeteria or at their desk, hear gunshots, and then be running out of the building without their badge, without their phone. You're looking at those people with their hands on the back of their heads, then being patted down before they leave the premises. It is stunning. It's something no one considers when they leave for work. And I want to mention one other piece of news that's just in. I just spoke about the shooter, a woman in her mid-30s. We have some more information about the victims. San Francisco General Hospital says it has received 3 patients and does not expect any more. One male, age 36, is in critical condition. One male, age 32, in serious condition. One female, age 27, in fair condition. We are giving you updates on this YouTube shooting. We're going to stay on top of this that just took place this afternoon in the San Francisco area. We'll keep you posted on any developments. We're going to take a quick break. When we return, we'll be discussing the other breaking news today, the first sentencing in Robert Mueller's probe, and new comments from Donald Trump about Vladimir Putin.
Patrick woke up with a sore back, but he's got work to do. So he took a leave this morning. If he'd taken Tylenol, he'd be stopping for more pills right now. Only Aleve has the strength to stop tough pain for up to 12 hours with just one pill. Tylenol can't do that. Aleve, all day strong, all day long. And for pain relief and a good night's rest, try Aleve PM for a better aim.
My time is thin, but so is my lawn.
Now there's new Scott's Thicker Lawn 3-in-1 solution with a soil improver, seed, and fertilizer to feed.
Now yard time is our time.
This is a Scott's Yard.
Applebee's to go. Order online and get $10 off $30. Now that's eating good in the neighborhood.
I thought I was managing my moderate to severe ulcerative colitis, but I realized something was missing. Me. The thought of my symptoms returning was keeping me from being there for the people and things I love most. So I talked to my doctor and learned Humira can help get and keep UC under control when other medications haven't worked well enough. And it helps people achieve control that lasts, so you could experience few or no symptoms.
Humira can lower your ability to fight infections, including tuberculosis. Serious, sometimes fatal infections and cancers, including lymphoma, have happened, as have blood, liver, and nervous system problems, serious allergic reactions, and new or worsening heart failure. Before treatment, get tested for TB. Tell your doctor if you've been to areas where certain fungal infections are common, and if you've had TB, hepatitis B, are prone to infections, or have flu-like symptoms or sores. Don't start Humira if you have an infection.
Be there for you and them. Ask your gastroenterologist about Humira. With Humira, control is possible.
Hi, Hi, Katie Osborne for Endurance. Like you, I love my car. And we're keeping our cars longer than ever, which means you're probably driving with little or even no warranty coverage. And let's be real, your car's going to break down sooner or later. Plus, if you're driving with an expired warranty, you will have to pay for those repairs. Do you even realize how much repairs cost these days? Look at these prices. There are so many other things I would rather buy than a new transmission or power steering. Well, to avoid these costs, you need Endurance. What's Endurance? It's an affordable vehicle protection plan that pays for your car repairs, the parts, the labor, it's all included. With Endurance, you will save thousands. Plus, you'll get to choose a mechanic who works on your car. Remember, insurance only protects you in an accident. That's only half the equation. The other half is Endurance, protecting you when your car breaks down. Don't forget, insurance plus endurance equals total protection.
Welcome back. I'm Stephanie Rule. You're watching MSNBC, and we are monitoring the breaking shooting news in the Bay Area. But we're going to take a turn now to the other breaking news today. The Russia probe and special counsel Robert Mueller bringing down the hammer today. Mueller getting his first sentence. Lawyer Alexander Vanderswan, tied to Paul Manafort and Rick Gates, getting 30 days in prison and a $20,000 fine for lying to the Mueller investigators. This as President Trump insists he's good with Putin today.
I think I could have a very good relationship with Russia and with President Putin. And if I did, that would be a great thing. It's a real possibility that I could have a good relationship. I think I could have a very good relationship with President Putin. I think it's possible I won't.
He thinks. With me now, former Watergate prosecutor, my friend Nick Ackerman, MSNBC terrorism analyst Malcolm Nance, CNBC editor-at-large John Harwood. To you first, Malcolm Nance. In a vacuum, it could be fair and constructive for the President of the United States to say he wants to have a good relationship with another world leader. But in this case, given that we know there was Russian interference in the last election, we have reason to believe Russia will try to interfere in our last election, and that we know poisoning took place in England just several weeks ago. Put into context for us what one should think when the president, in a pretty positive manner, should say, yep, I think I could have a great relationship or a good relationship with Vladimir Putin.
You know, Donald Trump says that he is the master of the art of the deal. But, you know, you can't begin a deal with an opponent across the table that you have a slavish devotion towards. Donald Trump's relationship with Vladimir Putin is baffling strictly because many people will not recognize the fact that for some strange reason that has yet to be resolved in the media, he has, how can I put it, he has almost a bromance going with him. The United States was attacked, as you said, in our most fundamental democratic process. They interfered with elections. They carried out a weapons of mass destruction attack at our closest NATO ally. They continue to interfere all over throughout cyberspace, and Donald Trump says this is where he's at his finest. I don't know how we're going to be able to process this.
Donald Trump also said today that no one has been tougher on Russia than he is. He then looked at the audience and said, you're all nodding because you know it's true. And he said, only very stupid people would disagree with him. I'll wait on that because that's a two-parter. But, Nick, how does the president actually say nobody's been tougher on Russia?
Because
I mean,
he's living in a
incorrect.
totally make-believe world. He has not been tough on Russia. He has not said one bad word about Vladimir Putin right through the campaign, right up until now, despite the fact that we had this poisoning in the UK a couple weeks ago, and he joined this effort by the other allies to kick out diplomats. That wasn't really, I mean, a really hard...
And he's not really kicking them out if you can swap in different ones.
Right. I mean, it doesn't really make a difference. What really would hurt is if he kept certain people out and he extended the sanctions and put more sanctions on Russia to keep out certain of these oligarchs. That's where it hurts. He is not doing anything where it really hurts Russia to be doing what they're doing. There is no deterrent effect being leveled by our president. It's really Very disturbing.
If Donald Trump is not doing anything to truly hurt Vladimir Putin, is Robert Mueller doing anything to truly hurt Donald Trump? Because today's sentencing, one could say, is it a big deal? It's 30 days, it's $20,000. Van der Zwaan could blow his nose with 20 grand. Why is it a big deal?
It's a big deal because he's spending time in jail. He did it for lying about things that he actually revealed after the fact.
And this guy, as a Skadden Arps lawyer, knows what happens when you lie to investigators. He's not a novice.
No, you wind up going to jail and you lose your law license. I mean, what's so unusual about this particular case is, in most instances, people who plead guilty are cooperating, and they're trying to get credit for cooperating so they can bring down their sentence. Here, it doesn't really look like his cooperation has gone beyond what he may have already done in the grand jury and what he may have already testified to. Very unusual. I mean, you don't see Flynn being sentenced at this point. You don't see Gates being sentenced anytime soon. They're looking to testify in a major conspiracy trial where they're going to get lots of brownie points for having cooperated and be able to bring down their sentence.
Then what is Robert Mueller's motivation here? Because Van der Zwaan isn't the only lawyer in the mix. Donald Trump has a cadre of lawyers, some who have quit, but who have had to stand up and say a lot of things that haven't made a whole lot of sense. Is Robert Mueller trying to send a message to them? Yeah, you too could be in trouble?
He is sending a message that when you deal with the special counsel's office, you tell the truth. You don't dissemble, you don't make up things, and you don't destroy evidence, because if you do, we're going to come after you and you're going to serve time in prison.
Malcolm, what's your take on what's happening in Mueller world?
Well, I think Nick is absolutely right. Let me talk a little bit about Van der Zwaan. Van der Zwaan is now a convicted federal felon. He, 30 days in jail, he can no longer, if he goes back overseas, he can't travel into the United States without having to put that on his visa.
I believe he's getting deported after this.
Yeah, well, and that's great. He can go back to his father-in-law, who's a Russian oligarch. But, I think Mueller is really making a point, not just to him, but as you said, to those other lawyers, to everybody else. This could just be the first count for many of these people is lying to a federal investigator. It's all the other things that they are hiding. And we clearly see that there are a lot of people hiding things. The sentences can only go up from there into years, as we've seen with Paul Manafort.
Well, they're not going to be able to hide as much as they want. John Harwood, let's talk about the memo and what we learned about what Robert Mueller is allowed to investigate. Because Paul Manafort was trying to make a case saying Mueller's gone too far. It is outside of what he should be focused on, looking into Manafort and his dealings with the Ukraine. But now we've learned, based on that memo, Rod Rosenstein said, oh no, we can go there and a whole lot of other places based on that blacked out information across the entire page.
Of course he can go there, and he is going there. Look, Robert Mueller is not respecting or bound by anything that Donald Trump has said is a red line. He is pursuing Trump's business dealings, and he's going hard, as my colleagues just indicated, using cooperation from Rick Gates, the deputy campaign manager who was involved with Manafort in the criminal activities that Manafort's been charged with. Also involved in the presidential transition, much later with the Trump campaign and transition than Paul Manafort was. And he also has cooperation from Michael Flynn, who was National Security Advisor in the White House. I think Robert Mueller is just getting started with charges here. We don't know yet what awaits Jared Kushner, what awaits Donald Trump Jr., or what awaits the president himself, not only on potential obstruction of justice, but also on the underlying issue of cooperation with the Russians, which, as we've discussed on this show before, we know that the Trump campaign sought to cooperate with the Russians. That's why Donald Trump Jr. accepted and set up that meeting at Trump Tower with Paul Manafort, with Jared Kushner and himself, and Russians offering dirt on Hillary Clinton.
So, Nick, walk me through, how can the president stay on this line? It's a hoax, it's a fraud. Robert Mueller and his team are Democrats. which we already know Robert Mueller
is a Republican.
Is a Republican.
Right.
If we talked about who's giving more money to Democratic candidates, Robert Mueller or Donald Trump, the answer would be Donald Trump. But can he continue this line that this is a witch hunt and a hoax when you've got Alex Vanderswan, who's been sentenced today, you've got 4 other people who've pleaded guilty at this point?
Yeah, I mean, it's hardly a witch hunt. You've got 4 wizards now that have pled guilty, right? You've got one who's been sentenced to jail.
Your Harry Potter tying the wizards.
Yes, exactly.
Like
and you've got Lord Voldemort, who's still out there, and that's the person who ought to be concerned.
Malcolm, walk us through. We know the president likes to say it's a hoax, it's a witch hunt, but can he really do that now that things are going deeper and further? And can members of the GOP leadership, who, by the way, don't have any ties to this, so they could come out and say something?
Well, you know, when Donald Trump speaks about the witch hunt, he is not talking to the American public that knows anything about this. He's talking to that very hardcore slice that refused to believe a word of this. I was just in a rest area the other day, and I heard a guy watching CNN and literally saying, fake news, fake news. I mean, his gaslighting has been world class. I mean, only done better by Vladimir Putin. And he has gotten a segment of American population to believe that whatever comes out of his mouth is the truth. The question is, when it finally comes down and Mueller, you know, finishes his investigation, will the information be so damaging, so horrible, that the Republican leadership will have to give up this pretense that there is nothing here to see? Donald Trump can say it all day that he wants. You know, the law is going to have a completely different say at the end of this.
Well, you're not talking a fair fight. The only one who does it better is Vladimir Putin. He often does it topless and in front of a white Bengal tiger. So he's got some extra added bonus. John Harwood, we're talking about President Trump's base. Malcolm was saying who will believe him no matter what. Talk about a different group of people who don't necessarily believe President Trump, but they don't seem to mind all of this. The market, investors, CEOs that continue to walk with President Trump. As they see indictments like this, people pleading guilty, how does the beat go on and they say, no big deal, deregulation and tax cuts work for me?
Well, a couple of points, Stephanie. First of all, the president's base, yes, he has a strong grip on his base, but that base is smaller than it used to be. He was at 39% in Gallup's weekly average released yesterday. So that is not an impressive number, and it's smaller than he started his presidency with. Second of all, different groups in the Trump voting coalition are responding to different things. So you have investors who may not be spooked about Russia as long as they're getting their tax cuts and seeing the economy going on a smooth path. But if they think that the tariffs that the president's imposing, and he just announced new targets for Chinese imports this afternoon, they are going to react to that. And that's when he starts hitting their pocketbook, that's a problem.
But let me just ask
Other members of the Trump base have different concerns over immigration, and that's why he was talking about sending the military to the U.S. border today.
But how is it that investors have the ability to compartmentalize how they view the administration? If things are getting hotter and hotter, if people are getting indicted, those are real risks, and investors have to focus on all sorts of geopolitical risks. Isn't a risk that your president is being investigated? Why doesn't the market care about that?
I absolutely agree with you, Stephanie, and it's been a mystery to me why the market has not taken those things more seriously as it's gone on. I've talked to people who manage money, and they say, I say, well, what happens if Trump is forced from office because of the Mueller investigation? And the answer was, well, that would be a short-term blip. Then Pence would be in there and things would calm down. People are looking more to the fundamentals of the global economy, of which the United States is a big part, rather than the drama itself in Washington as a driver. But I do think the disruption that you would get from a more serious Mueller probe that endangers the Trump presidency, I don't see how the markets could avoid taking their measure of that and reacting to that if that in fact does materialize. And by the way, if Democrats are on the verge or in a good position to potentially take over the Congress this fall, if they take over the Congress, the Trump administration is going to be in jeopardy. Let's just face that fact, because Mueller is going to continue doing his work. We don't know what he's going to come out with, but Democrats would try to impeach President Trump if they take the Congress.
And at the end of the day, investors like strong corporate earnings and low interest rates, and President Trump is not responsible for either one. Gentlemen, thank you so much for that very important conversation. Stay with me. Coming up today, President Trump floated a new idea for the border, and it would mean using the military. We'll have those details next.
More and more people are finding themselves in a Chevrolet for the first time. Trying something new can be exciting, empowering, downright exhilarating. See for yourself why Chevrolet is the most awarded and fastest growing brand the last 4 years overall.
Switch into a new Chevy now. Current competitive owners can get $5,000 below MSRP on this 2018 Equinox when you finance with GM Financial. Find new roads at your local Chevy dealer.
Maria's always on the go, taking over 7,000 steps each day, and she does it in any shoes she wants, with lasting comfort. Only Dr. Scholl's stylish step has insoles that are clinically proven to provide all-day comfort. Dr. Scholl's, born to move.
Wouldn't accept an incomplete job from anyone else. Why accept it from your allergy pills? Flonase relieves your worst symptoms, including nasal congestion, which most pills don't. Flonase helps block 6 key inflammatory substances. Most pills only block 1. Flonase.
At Ally, we offer low-cost trades and high-yield savings. But if that's not enough, we offer innovative investing tools to prepare you for the future.
Looks like you hooked it.
And if that's not enough, we'll help your kid prepare for the future.
Don't hook it, kid.
And if that's still not enough, we'll help your kid's kid prepare for the future.
Looks like he hooked it.
We'll do anything.
Takes after his granddad.
Seriously, anything to help you invest for the future. Ally, do it right.
Touch is how we communicate with those we love. But does psoriasis ever get in the way? Embrace the chance of 100% clear skin with Taltz. For people with moderate to severe psoriasis, up to 90% had a significant improvement of their psoriasis plaques. With Taltz, 4 out of 10 even achieved completely clear skin. Don't use if you're allergic to Taltz. Before starting, you should be checked for tuberculosis. Taltz may increase risk of infections and lower your ability to fight them. Tell your doctor if you have an infection, symptoms, or received a vaccine or plan to. Inflammatory bowel disease can happen with Taltz, including worsening of symptoms. Serious allergic reactions can occur. Ready for a chance at 100% clear skin? Ask your doctor about Taltz. Try it for as little as $5 a month.
I'm a fighter. Always have been. When I found out I had age-related macular degeneration, AMD, I wanted to fight back. My doctor and I came up with a plan. It includes PreserVision.
Only PreserVision AREDS 2 has the exact nutrient formula recommended by the National Eye Institute to help reduce the risk of progression of moderate to advanced AMD, backed by 15 years of clinical studies.
That's why I fight. Because it's my vision, PreserVision.
For my constipation, my doctor recommended I switch to Miralax. Stimulant laxatives make your body go by forcefully stimulating the nerves in your colon. Miralax is different. It works with the water in your body to hydrate and soften, unblocking your system naturally. Miralax.
Coming up, America's new secret pleasure, Deal Dash.
Another package from Deal Dash.
Thanks. I won.
DealDash.com auctions thousands of cool new products and offers a 90-day money-back guarantee on your first bid-pack purchase.
Want to go shopping? Can't. I'm in the middle of a really hot auction for some super cute stuff. I won. Woohoo! Mom, what'd you win?
Use promo code FREE to get 100 free bids on your first purchase. Visit DealDash.com.
Did you know that every time you use the internet, you put yourself at risk? Not only can your internet service provider see every website you visit, hackers can see your transaction details. Strangers can monitor your children's activity. NordVPN uses military-grade security protocols that protect your information so no one can see what you do online. Protect up to 6 devices for just $4 per month. Don't risk being hacked. Visit nordvpn.com/TV today.
Been speaking with General Mattis. We're going to be doing things militarily. Until we can have a wall and proper security, we're going to be guarding our border with the military.
Well, there you go. President Trump floating a provocative new idea using the military to guard the border. Later, he was asked to clarify exactly what he meant.
Could you clarify what you meant about having the U.S. military guard the U.S. border along with Mexico?
The Mexican border is very unprotected by our laws. Hopefully Congress will get their act together and get in and create some very powerful laws like Mexico has and like Canada has and like almost all countries have. We don't have laws. We have catch and release. You catch and then you immediately release, and people come back years later for a court case, except they virtually never come back. So we are preparing for the military to secure our border between Mexico and the United States. We have a meeting on it in a little while with General Mattis.
Francesca Chambers is the White House correspondent for the Daily Mail, and back with me, my friend John Harwood. Francesca, there are many crises that need to be dealt with, but this doesn't appear to be one. So where did this idea come from?
Well, it's not entirely clear where exactly this came from, other than the caravan that the president has been tweeting about for the last several days of the Honduran migrants who were making their way through Mexico to the U.S. border. The president has been fixated in that in tweets, saying that not only do we need the border wall, but also saying today that he could cut off aid to Honduras and other countries like that, such as Guatemala or El Salvador. They would also be in that category. Then he says that he might put the military on the border. As you played back for us there, he was asked about that in a press conference. He didn't really have any other additional details on that. So certainly we're all waiting to see what branch of the military he might be talking about, how many members of the military he might be talking about, and the president saying today that all of that will come up in a meeting with General Mattis and others this week. He could also pay for his border wall, as he said last week, with funding from the Pentagon, although lawmakers are saying both of those things are no-go. So we'll be waiting to hear more on that for sure.
Okay, well, Mexico is one of our closest allies. They're one of our top trading partners, but it seems that we're not treating one another that way, at least at this moment. The Mexican ambassador responded to the U.S. by saying it's certainly not something the Mexican government welcomes. Where is this relationship going? We know we've got a presidential election coming up in Mexico, and there's a very anti-Trump candidate in the lead.
Well, and President Trump will be going to the Summit of the Americas next week, and this is very important now because there will be those presidents from the countries that I just discussed, including Mexico. And Mexican President Peña Nieto has not been to the White House yet because of this relationship and these back and forths between him and the president. So we'll be waiting to see if they'll have a meeting there.
John, is this all about his base?
I think so. I think the president's frustrated that, first of all, he's been unable to get funding for his border wall. And by the way,
John,
just to be...
his base in Texas would say this is not a crisis. We don't need a wall.
Oh, no, it's not a crisis at all. It definitely is an immigration levels are way down. But this is something the president used to get votes in the campaign. He promised that Mexico was going to pay for the wall. Of course, they're not. And the other reality is the wall's never going to be built. Okay, so let's make that clear. But he's trying to make it look like it's going to be built. So now that he got only $1.5 billion for this wall, which is largely to restore or rehabilitate existing fencing, he's trying to say, A, it's being built, and B, if it isn't built, conservatives, I'm going to put troops on the border to protect you. This is to create the illusion of action and toughness. But as you suggested, it is a dangerous thing to do to put U.S. military forces on the border with an ally like that.
A dangerous thing to do. We're going to keep following this story. Francesca, John, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for watching this evening. That does it for me. My friend Ari Melber will be back in this seat tomorrow evening, and I will see you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Hardball with Chris Matthews starts right now.
Trump guards his rear. Let's play hardball. Good evening. I'm Chris Matthews in San Francisco. President Trump finds himself tonight in a two-front war, trying to kill off the notion he's been in bed with Vladimir Putin all the way to the White House, and two, trying to convince his hard-right supporters that he's really out to stop illegal immigration, wall or no wall. But we begin with the breaking news of that shooting at the headquarters of YouTube, just to the south of me in San Bruno, California. Police responded to reports of a shooting at 12:48 this afternoon Pacific time. Aerial footage showed employees walking out of the building with their hands up. Police described a scene of chaos when they arrived. Authorities confirmed that a female suspect, a woman in her 30s, was deceased at the scene. Well, San Bruno Police Chief Ed Barberini briefed reporters just a short time ago.
We did encounter one victim with an apparent gunshot wound towards the front of the business as we arrived. Several minutes later, while conducting a search of the premises, officers located a second individual with a gunshot wound that appears to may have been self-inflicted. We are still working on confirming that. Two additional victims were located several minutes later at an adjacent business. The extent of all of the injuries of our victims are unknown right now. They were all transported for emergency medical care, but they are all unknown. So if I missed that, we have 4 victims.
Well, just in the past hour, law enforcement officials told NBC they believe the motive was a domestic-related dispute. ATF and FBI investigators were on the scene assisting local law enforcement agencies. For more, I'm joined by NBC News Justice correspondent Pete Williams. What do we have now, Pete, as of now?
Well, so many times in a situation like this, Chris, we don't know what the motive was, but we seem to know that tonight. What the authorities are telling us is that this woman came to the YouTube workplace with a specific target in mind, someone she knew, someone with whom she wanted to settle a grievance. She shot that person, as she may have shot a second person who was with him intentionally. We're not sure about the third person. The authorities have told us that the male that she shot is in critical condition in the hospital in San Francisco. The 2 women are in serious and fair condition. But this is not the kind of workplace shooting where someone shows up to send a message or try to create as much carnage as possible. This was someone who came there, authorities say, to settle a grievance. As far as the firearm used, we are waiting confirmation of it, but all the indications we've had so far is that she had a semi-automatic handgun, a pistol, and semi-automatic simply means that it fires every time you pull the trigger. Witnesses have said they heard a number of shots, so the scenario would appear to be that the victims were outside eating lunch when this woman showed up with a gun, saw them there, opened fire, and then apparently the police say shot and killed herself. So as we speak now, just one fatality, the gun woman, the assailant herself, 3 people in the hospital with gunshot wounds, and another person who was apparently injured, probably running in the chaos with an injured ankle. So it could have been much worse. But the motive seems to be pretty clear tonight. This was someone trying to settle a grievance.
Pete Williams, thank you so much for that report. Let's go to Zach Voorhees, who was an eyewitness. He's going to join us by phone. He's a YouTube software engineer who was actually in the building at the time of the shooting. Zach, tell us what you went through.
Hey, Chris Matthews. Yeah, I was at my desk working when the fire alarm went off. And we all thought that, okay, well, there's a fire alarm. We exited the back of the building. I had my electric skateboard, and I put the skateboard on the ground, and I started going down the hill towards the courtyard. And I heard some yelling going on, and when I arrived near the courtyard, I heard somebody yelling, do you want to shoot me? And I looked to my left, which was his right, and I saw somebody lying on their back on the concrete with what appeared to be a gunshot wound through the stomach. And I say that because there was a red splotch on his shirt, and he wasn't moving. And at that point, I didn't really understand what was going on until I saw the door that separated the courtyard from the street open up, and a police officer came in with an assault rifle. And at that point, I I ran away. I put my skateboard down and I exited that area. I went to the parking structure and escaped to the side and made it out okay.
Was the voice, could you decide if this was male or female that said, "Do you want to shoot me"?
It was a male. It was a male, yeah.
And so you believe it must be, or was the person that you saw there on the ground wounded, badly wounded in his stomach?
Yeah, and before I thought that was the shooter, but now I'm not so sure. I think there might have been some sort of like verbal argument that was going on, and that's when I entered into the scene. But yeah, it was a man.
Zach, thanks for that scary reporting for yours. Thanks so much, Zach Voorhees, who worked there at YouTube. Anyway, he witnessed the shooting. We're going to continue to follow any developments in the shooting throughout this hour. Of course, this is all live coverage right now. But now to politics. President Trump hit out a wide range of targets today in a barrage of early morning tweets. And then in multiple interactions with reporters, the president called out every network but one, calling them all fake news. We know which one he skipped. He mocked the president of CNN, continued his attack on Amazon, threatened the government of Mexico, demanded credit for helping NATO, took jabs at Hillary Clinton and even at Barack Obama, and said he was sending the military to the border with Mexico. He's sending the military down there. That was all before lunch today. Then at a joint press conference with leaders of the Baltic states, he derided the U.S. press generally. Let's watch.
Pick a reporter, please. You could pick a reporter, a Baltic reporter, ideally. Real news, not fake news.
Oh, what a chuckle. Anyway, President Trump again today defended the Sinclair Broadcast Group, the local news behemoth that is known to mix right-leaning commentary into their news coverage. He tweeted, by the way, at 6:30 this morning, quote, "The fake news networks, those that knowingly have a sick and biased agenda, are worried about the competition and quality of Sinclair Broadcast." Well, he also tweeted about the outlier poll that showed his approval rating higher than other polls have been showing him. "Thank you to Rasmussen," he said, "for the honest polling. Just hit 50%, which is higher than cheating Obama at the same time in his administration." God knows where that cheating Obama phrase came from. It's not exactly clear what earned the former president that nickname. Anyway, Susan Page is Washington Bureau Chief of U.S. Today. Robert Costa is national political reporter for the Washington Post and an MSNBC political analyst. And Eddie Glaude, of course, is chairman of the Center for African American Studies at Princeton and an MSNBC contributor. Let me start with Susan. I have a sense that the president is fighting two wars right now, as we said in the opening headline before we went into the shooting out down here at San Bruno in California. I get the feeling that he's worried about people like Ann Coulter saying he's going soft on the wall, that he's not really going to deliver for his base. And even though maybe his numbers are very high right now among his base, maybe up to the 40s, I don't think they're to 50, they're certainly in the low 40s now, that he's worried he's losing something, and that's why he's screaming all this crazy stuff about bringing troops to the border, etc. Your thoughts?
You know, I think we've really gone back to the future here. It's as though we're back in 2015 and during the 2016 campaigns. There was no issue that animated Donald Trump and his followers more than the issue of immigration and the concerns about what was happening coming over the border and the threats that they saw there. He is returning to those themes, and I think it reflects both a desire to kind of bolster his support among his base, you know, and also it may reflect the fact that he has seemed quite liberated from those who had surrounded him on the White House staff, who were urging caution, urging him not to go with this gut. I'm thinking of people like H.R. McMaster, for instance, or Gary Cohn, or Rob Porter. I mean, people who urged him to maybe think twice, sometimes do not what his first instinct was. Those people have been either lost some of their power or have gone away, and we are left with more a pure distillation of Donald Trump.
Robert, here's my theory about Trump's political goals. I think he wants to run right now for re-election. Who knows what he'll decide in a couple of years, but I think he wants to run. And I think his entire strategy comes down to two parts. One, grab and hold 45% of the electorate, which was enough to get him elected the first time in the Electoral College. Grab and hold it. He now feels he's got a hold of it, thanks to Rasmussen's overestimations, but still, he thinks he's pretty solid at 45 now. Hold on to that for all he's got. Fight on the wall, fight on immigration, fight on crime, whatever holds that faction together. And then wait for the Democrats to pick an opponent and knock his head or her head off. In other words, go mano a mano against whoever they run. He wins that way, but he's already setting up the first proposition, which is hold 45%. That's enough to win, and then knock the other guy's head off. That's what he's up to, I think.
He already has an election staring. He already has an election staring him in the face, Chris. The midterm elections this year, and he is trying to rouse the base, not just looking to 2020, but to 2018. My White House sources say the president believes talking about the wall, sending troops to the border, that's the way to get that base to turn out this November. But there's a divide in the Republican Party. Many congressional Republicans uncomfortable with the tack the president takes on some of these issues, the controversy he welcomes. They'd rather run on the tax cut, but there's just not a coherent chorus with this Republican Party and how they're going to approach the election.
Yeah. Well, they never did like him. He beat them, remember, Robert? They didn't join him. He beat them.
And they're just not comfortable with his style of politics. They see him fighting with the media every day, picking these new fights, trying to, again, focus on immigration. They think the immigration voter on the conservative side is already there. They're worried about the suburban voter who turned in Alabama in December, turned in southwestern Pennsylvania this spring.
Eddie, let me ask you about this refresher course in Obama hatred. What is that about? Is that just playing the race card? I mean, when he goes after Obama, it has nothing to do with the current conversation at all, and starts talking about cheating Obama. Is that just playing the ethnic thing? I mean, sometimes I wonder if that's just what he does to keep that base happy. Your thoughts?
I think so, Chris. I think it is in part a part of the kind of race baiting that is in some ways a feature of his invocation of the immigration question. He's appealing to the baser instincts of his base, as it were. It's also a case study for Freud in terms of projection. There's something about his obsession with Obama and what he's constantly projecting onto him that suggests something about his psyche. In some ways,
help me. Go on. Follow this truth. Follow this all the way. What is it?
In some ways, it seems to me that the success of Obama, the fact that Obama clowned him, to use a kind of colloquial phrase, clowned him at that, well, I forget which event it was, where he joked about it.
It was the White House press card.
The press dinner, exactly.
Made a fool of him, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The success of his administration over the 8 years, the fact that Obama made fun of him or clowned him at the press club meeting, right, has made him the object of Trump's scorn. In other words, everything that Obama is, Trump desires to be. So he projects his failings.
What is that? I mean, I look at the outer aspects of what you might envy and
agent, and under him are a number of security managers who hail from the NYPD, years and years and years of experience, and it's critical as the company entire globe. And we keep looking at this shot of firefighters, and there's a lot of firefighters scene today because as first responders, they bring a lot of special skills. They're all trained in medical out there, and all better than average at search and rescue and all the problems that could come up. You never know if fire is going to be used as a weapon, if gas is going to be used as a weapon, if their equipment is going to be needed to be parked as a shield, which is often the case. So they have been called out along with chiefs, battalion chiefs, obviously all of law enforcement within a 50-mile radius. We're 2 minutes before the hour of 6 p.m. We've heard Joe Fryer and we've heard the local police chief going through what we know. It appears that at this hour, and facts change in these situations, we have one fatality.